I want to start today's episode with a bit of a personal story. Today's game, Breath of Fire 3, has quite the story tied to it, not just in game, but for me outside of it too. This is actually the first installment of the Breath of Fire series I ever got the chance to play over at a friend's house. See, I didn't have any gaming magazine subscriptions as a kid, so I learned about the games I know of by word of mouth or by renting them. Ah, crap, I need to explain that, don't I? You see, kids, there was once this magical time known as pre-internet days, where you had brick-and-mortar stores where you would go in and rent movies and video games. Of course, movies weren't on DVDs or Blu-rays, they were on these brick-shaped black boxes called VHS tapes. And yes, the best way of staying on the cusp of new releases was with print magazine subscriptions you'd have to bug your parents into getting you. And while some of this did exist in the internet era, it was the time where you had to dial into the internet, and it required its own proprietary phone line. If you picked up the phone while someone was online, you disconnected them. I am not nostalgic for those times. However, it does go to show that those were interesting times to be alive. But lo, my friend in middle school introduced me not only to today's game, but as the main reason I discovered Legend of the Gaia, latter-day Final Fantasies, including 7, 8, and 9, and yes, Monster Rancher. A decade and change later, this game would also be the catalyst for me meeting the Lone Ranger. So in celebration of that fact, I've invited my buddy to accompany me as we delve into our closer look at the third installment of the Breath of Fire saga. Let's get to it. Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snack, and today I'm accompanied by my good friend, the Lone Ranger.
Thanks for having me along. It's always a treat to be able to look and talk about these formative experiences in our lives, and this series has certainly been that for both of us, as individuals and since meeting in that small but welcoming forum. As Sneck mentioned, there are a lot of games that he and I share a passion for that way.
And we'll be taking a look at Capcom's dragon-centric RPG series and its third installment, Breath of Fire 3. It was launched in Japan in 1997, and in North America and PAL regions in 1998 for the original PlayStation. It would then receive a widescreen port for the PSP in Japan circa 2005, and PAL regions a year later. However, players of North America wouldn't receive it until 2016 because Sony as a company is completely, utterly incompetent.
Now, before you all jump up and down in defense of Sony, they still don't think Australia is good enough to warrant having their streaming stuff available here. But I digress. Breath of Fire is a criminally mistreated series by publishers and developers alike, and while each title was hampered at release by a glut of RPGs in the market, and earlier titles by translation and other challenges, Breath of Fire 3 should have been where Capcom and Sony made the choice to really back the series. Re-releases were a little bit challenged by, among other things, a small but obvious homage to Ultraman, but it's time and past that the series gets the treatment it and its fans deserve. Plot and character-wise, the Breath of Fire games share a common thread. A mute, blue-haired protagonist, a winged princess, humanoid races with animal features, dragons, magic, and a bit of philosophy posing as metaphor. Basically what you'd expect from a late 90s, early aughts RPG. More comfortable in this third installment with plot escalation, it begins with an excavation where a baby dragon is released from a fossilized crystal egg. Our blue-haired protagonist is brought up poor and hungry by two other orphans just trying to get by. They fall afoul of a shady businessman, then the mafia, and by the end of the game are fighting God herself for the right to self-determination. As each character's plot threads are added to the tapestry, we find ourselves sympathizing with the revenge plight of the older brother character who just wanted to do right by us, digging into the mysterious family and past of our mechanic, rearing a sentient onion, and guiding an ancient warrior through a crisis of religious faith, all the while discovering, glimmer by glimmer, the fate of the dragons and how our protagonist fits in. It also wouldn't be an RPG without mini-games and side quests to distract us, so we'll find ourselves at various points teaching a village of fairies how to take care of themselves, making sushi for an otherwise unhelpful mayor, and emptying the seas, rivers, and lakes of fish, octopi, and whales with nothing more than a rod and a piece of cutlery. And if that doesn't sound wild enough to make you at least want to check it out, I'd suggest booking an appointment with your doctor to check for adrenal exhaustion.
Graphically, Breath of Fire 3 is a beautiful game that uses a mixed medium presentation. The world is built in 3D polys with rolling hills, buildings, and obstacles all lovingly crafted and textured as such. But the characters, objects, monsters, and boss encounters are all 2D sprites designed to always face towards the camera. Even some 3D-looking objects like small bushes and trees are actually intersecting 2D sprites in an X shape, giving an illusion of depth. It's very clever use of system resources, and it helps in limiting load times that could plague other PS1 RPGs. In fact, Breath of Fire 3 is also the first installment of the series that doesn't load up a battle arena when you start a fight. Rather, you remain standing precisely where you were on the map when the battle starts, turning only to face wherever it is the random encounter loaded in from. And it's all done really well. The character sprites are bright and colorful and really pop into view, helped by having things like Ryu's bright blue hair or Nina's stark red dress to help make them really stand out at all times. It also helps that the sprite animations are silky smooth, with even small touches like Ryu's basic attack animation gradually changing as the story progresses, all adding to a sense of cohesiveness and excellent artistic direction. I cannot praise this game's graphical design enough. Some of the spell effects even share these qualities, like how some use 2D sprites and others are rendered in 3D animations. It's just amazing.
Brief aside before I delve into my wheelhouse. When you think of jazz music in video games, what comes to mind? Seedy bars, casinos, slick and shady villains, jazz being after all the devil's music, maybe the film noir oeuvre of Grim Fandango. Whatever the association might be, it was clearly not the thinking of Akari Kaida and Yoshino Aoki, who decided that Breath of Fire 3 would have a soundtrack nearly entirely inspired by jazz music. And you know what? It works. And it works for reasons that reviewers actually panned it for at the time. When the game came out, reviewers commented that the music seemed more appropriate for a corporate infomercial than a heroic fantasy RPG. I hold that this was intentional. It doesn't matter that you're off on the hero's journey. The soundtrack keeps those little starving village roots close in mind even as the plot scales up to global impact levels. The story denouement hinges somewhat on how you perceive the opening hours of the game as well as the journey, and that constant reminder of coming from a simple laid-back place is excellent. Now that's not to say that the soundtrack doesn't escalate appropriately either. From the humorous Chickens in the Night, which plays as you attempt to enter a mansion to steal money taken illegally from your fellow townsfolk, through to the jagged and synth-heavy tones of Self-Determination, which plays over the final battle. Just as jazz is a multifaceted genre, Breath of Fire 3 explores those facets with skill and attention to both detail and enjoyment. Not every track is a hum-along earworm either, so the music sits appropriately in a position to enhance the story and the game without becoming its main feature. Some of the more notable tracks include People, Cats, Birds and Sea Lice, the background theme for the port city of Rapala, which beautifully captures comfortable coastal living in a little 24-bar paraphrase, Deep Purple, the character theme of returning cast member Dias, which rolls an Eye of the Tiger-esque musical introduction into a powerful driving melody, and Tale of a Shark, a Jaws homage that plays as the party meets a mutant dolphin-shark hybrid thing with an Australian slang dialect so impenetrable that the game provides you a translation immediately afterwards so you know what it's saying. As an experiment for jazz music as a soundtrack, Breath of Fire 3 doesn't always nail it perfectly, but that's what experimenting is about. The experiment continued in a different direction in later games too, but we'll leave that for then.
Mechanically, Breath of Fire 3 is a major evolution in the series, not only in the way it elegantly simplifies the battle menu to the point where you could navigate it almost exclusively with simple control pad inputs, but also in the many ways it's expanded upon the number of options a player has. For instance, Ryu and company can now use the Examine command in order to watch their enemy carefully and look for abilities they can copy. This doesn't work 100% of the time and may require some trial and error, but especially in the early game, the ability to get access to monster abilities will prove not only amazingly fun, but downright practical. You'll also learn that enemies have different weaknesses, as per the norm in any RPG, but exploiting them can not only do things like make a very difficult battle easy, it can also have other beneficial effects. A good example early game are the Nut family of enemies, like the Nut Knight, Nut Mage, and Nut Archer, who look like tiny acorn people. Under normal circumstances, they don't have that much health, but they have an annoyingly high evasion rate. However, by using fire magic, including the burn spell one can learn from the Mage Slime enemies, you can not only finish them off in just one hit, but it doubles the amount of XP they pay out. Likewise, using the Frost spell on the Tarman enemy solidifies them, dropping their otherwise enormous defense down to pitiful amounts and rendering them unable to attack, making an enemy that could possibly be a huge problem into a piece of cake for the well-prepared dragon warrior. Fight smarter, not harder. Then, once you're out of the prologue leg of the game, Ryu unlocks his natural dragon abilities per the norm. But this time, I think the game has the best dragon system of the series, in my humble, sneaky opinion. You unlock dragon genes, marble-like stones which are added to your own submenu of Ryu's accession ability, and you may select up to 3 at a time, each gene requiring a certain amount of action points, or AP, to be paid to transform, and a percentage of the total paid each turn as a maintenance fee. And this leads into the way each gene behaves both on its own and how it works when combined with others. I love the Dragon Gene system, and I find it the best balance between the systems found in 1 and 2 and 4. Some combos may work and some don't. For example, the Reverse Gene, which inverts properties of other genes when paired with the Thunder Gene, gives you a dragon that has no traits at all. But at the same time, you can also find Gold Dragon forms, or supercharged dragons who are markedly more potent than the sum of their parts. The first in the game is the Trigon, who you can get by combining the Flame, Frost, and Thunder genes, yielding a very powerful dragon that doesn't cost much AP to utilize. And those are just Ryu's abilities. Oh, and the mid-game introduces one of my favorite minigames in the entire franchise, let alone this game, the Fairy Village. You find a secluded fairy village in a pocket dimension, or something like that, it's a little unclear, and there you become commander and issue them jobs to ensure they have enough food, space, resources, and infrastructure. You can get specialty shops, novelties, minigames, even quirky little things like a fairy who will rename your party members and more. It takes time to progress and master this, but it's so much fun. I couldn't not mention this. That said, the core gameplay is a more traditional turn-based RPG. You can form a team of 3 heroes, and the game will often prioritize certain terrible ones like Nina, due to story reasons. Thankfully, there's the Master System.
The Master System is an interesting little piece of game design choice which allows for you to more effectively min-max your party, or, if you're so inclined, override party default behaviours over time. By apprenticing under a Master, your character growth is altered. For instance, the first available Master, the Wizard Mygas, will hasten your character's magic stat growth at the expense of strength. After being under a Master for a number of levels, they will also teach you additional learnable abilities, including some of the strongest in the game. Permanent stat increase items are also available, so you can truly max out your party if you have the patience for it. But for optimization right up until the endgame, Masters are the way to go. There are 17 Masters available over the course of the game, each with skills, benefits, and detractions. There are even some Masters that, with the knowledge that hindsight and a game replay brings, might teach you skills that would allow you to one-shot certain bosses, or exponentially increase your magical prowess in dragon forms. The skills are also not limited to the apprentice character and can be changed with an item at any campsite.
If I had to find fault, and I do because I'm a pedant, is that I tend to prefer larger RPG parties and more options. Going from 4 heroes to 3 and then only having 6 choices besides is kind of a bummer, especially as you won't have all 6 all the time due to the way the story progresses. So it feels like you're forced to use what the game wants you to, rather than getting any real input on the subject, especially as Nina is mechanically a terrible pick. Beyond that though, I still hold the game in very high regard. It has a vastly superior gameplay, presentation, and story translation than its predecessors, and I think it withstands the test of time as a quality 40-hour RPG adventure that's worth revisiting time and time again.
The other truly awesome Breath of Fire 3 minigame that warrants mention again is the fishing. The fishing minigame is really well thought out to keep you in control of each element of it. The standard different lures, different rods, different fish in different locations that you'll see in such minigames, of course. But you can also make your lure more attractive to rare fish by tapping it rhythmically in time with the music before the fish bite. And the fish have vastly different effects as consumable items too, making it in some cases very desirable to spend the time fishing before, for instance, boss battles. To top that off, maxing out your fishing rank grants you a special item that means you no longer need consumables to swap the character's magic and skills around. The only critique of the Breath of Fire 3 minigame, an element that they fixed in Breath of Fire 4, is that it's slightly too easy. 20 minutes will easily see you empty an ocean of whales, and sometimes the heart just isn't in it without the struggle. Similarly to Sneck's thoughts, there's not much that's really a mistake with this game, and the few things that could be considered it tended to be as a result of attempting to innovate. The Dragon Gene system has tremendous potential, but very little incentive to explore it to its fullest once you discover the ideal combinations. A few of the character and location themes get a bit samey. Most egregiously, the game's biggest translation issue was a game-breaking one for some. An area called the Desert of Death requires a bit of celestial navigation to successfully traverse. The instructions you're given initially are correct, but in the English translation, the copy of the instructions that you write down to take with you has east and west reversed. As one of those things I know makes Sneck seethe with frustration, this was definitely a disappointing oversight. But if those little issues, and the one major one there, can be forgiven, then it's a very solid game, and still enjoyable right through to now, 25 years later.
And this has been the Lone Ranger and the Hipster Snack, taking a look at one of the Capcom classics for your entertainment today. Thanks for your help, buddy.
Thanks again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And if you liked today's episode, hit the like button so I know. Leave a comment down below. What was your favorite team to use, and why was it Ryu, Momo, and Ray? And for more like this each week, hit the subscribe and bell icon so you'll never miss a one. Follow me here each week from our obscure reviews, Indie X, Snack Tech, and the new home of the Tomodachi Bros Review Podcast Season 2 coming soon. Join us here, and I'll see you there.